ordered pair 3, 0 is going to be on this graph. Okay, so far we have 2 points that are on this graph. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the vertical and horizontal asymptotes. For the vertical asymptote, that gives us the zeros of the denominator. If we look here, we have a quadratic in the denominator, which means we could have 2 zeros because we can factor it fairly easily. We have a 0 at 4, and we have a 0 at -1. So we have a vertical asymptote at x equals 4 and at x equals -1. So I'm going to draw a vertical line at 4. Remember, we're going to do vertical dashed lines here to represent that. And we have a vertical dashed line at -1. Okay, so here's our vertical asymptotes. And remember, our graph will never cross over these. In terms of horizontal asymptotes, let's look at the degrees. The degree of my numerator is first degree. The degree of my denominator is second degree. That means the degree of my numerator is smaller than my denominator, so we're going to have a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. Okay, so we have a graph now that's filled with a few points, that's filled with a bunch of horizontal and vertical lines. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to put this all together to figure out what the graph looks like, and that is by creating the chart that helps us approach the vertical asymptotes from 2 directions. Now in this case, because we have 2 vertical asymptotes, and I have to approach each one of them from 2 directions, I have to have 4 columns for them. So let's do this. Now remember, I'm approaching 4 from both directions. I'm going to approach 4 from the left and the right. So I'm going to say 4 minus, that's coming from the left. That's what happens as I get closer to here. And then 4 plus, which means when I'm coming from the right, what's it going to look like? And then we have a vertical asymptote at -1 also. So we're going to do -1 from the left and -1 from the right. I'm going to choose a number that best represents this region. So we're going to get very close, but we're making sure that we're in the proper direction. So a number that's a little bit smaller than 4, a little bit to the left of 4 is 3.9. Bigger than 4 is 4.1. A number that's a little smaller than -1, a little bit to the left of -1 is -1.1. And a number that's a little bit bigger than -1, a little bit to the right of -1, is -0.9. Once I get these, I'm going to substitute these values back into, and it's easier to do it, substitute them back into the factored version, the original rational expression that we had. That will tell us very quickly if the quotient is going to be positive or negative. So watch this. Let's start off with 3.9. 3.9 minus 3 is positive. 3.9 minus 4 is negative, times 3.9 plus 1 is positive. So we end up with a positive divided by a negative times a positive. That's the same thing as saying a positive divided by a negative, and a positive divided by a negative is negative. So as x approaches 4 from the left, our y values, or h of x, is going to approach negative infinity. Let's try 4.1. 4.1 minus 3 is positive. 4.1 minus 4 is positive. 4.1 plus 1 is positive. A positive divided by a positive times a positive is a positive divided by a positive, which is a positive. Let's use negative 1.1 now. Negative 1.1 minus 3 is a negative. Negative 1.1 minus 4 is a negative. Negative 1.1 plus 1 is also a negative. So here we have a negative divided by a negative times a negative. That's the same thing as saying a negative divided by a positive, which is a negative. And the last value we're going to substitute in, which is negative 0.9. Negative 0.9 minus 3 is a negative. Negative 0.9 minus 4 is a negative. Negative 0.9 plus 1 is a positive. So we have a negative divided by a negative times a positive. That's the same thing as saying a negative divided by a negative, which is a positive. Okay, so we're going to put all of this together, and let's finish graphing this function. Let's do it piece by piece. Let's start off over here. Let's do the outermost parts. And in this outermost part here, x is approaching 4 from the right. So let's start over here. As x approaches 4 from the right, our y values are approaching positive infinity. So I'm going to stay near my horizontal asymptote. I'm getting closer and closer to 4 from the right-hand side, and my y values have to shoot up to positive infinity. So this is what that first part of the graph looks like. On this side, let's see what's happening on this outermost point. As x approaches, so here what we're doing, we're approaching -1 from the left. So -1 from the left is right here. My y value is approaching negative infinity. As x approaches -1 from the left, my y value is approaching negative infinity. Now this is an important point. We have to be underneath the x-axis. We can't be above. If we were above, then we would see another x-intercept, and our graph only has one x-intercept, which is over here. So we're going to stay below, we're going to stay near the horizontal asymptote, and we're going to shoot down pretty quickly to negative infinity. Let's finish the rest of the graph. Now notice we have this piece in the middle. Once we have this piece in the middle, we kind of pick a middle convenient point to start with, and then use the direction the graph is telling us to go to finish. So let's see what happens as x approaches 4 from the left. So I'm going to start right here. It's in between these two. As x approaches 4 from the left, my y value is approaching negative infinity. So I'm going to start right here. Again, I'm just choosing this convenient point because it's kind of halfway between these two. As I get closer to 4, my y values are going to shoot on down to negative infinity. And let's see what's happening in the other direction. You should be able to tell at this point, but let's finish the graph anyway. Over here, I'm approaching -1 from the right-hand side, which is -1 from the right-hand side. As x approaches -1 from the right, my y values are approaching positive infinity. So I'm going to go back to this point over here. We have to make sure we have smooth, well-connected functions. My y values are approaching positive infinity, and this is a very good general graph with all the information that we need to have on it.